Welcome to Cardboard Chemistry. I'm your host, MTG Labman, and today we're going over the set mechanics for the upcoming Secrets of Strixhaven set. We're nearing the end of spoiler season, and I just want to do a quick podcast about the specific sets mechanics. Just to get a little bit of clarification, pre-release will be next Friday, the 17th, and just wanted to cover some other mechanics just for those going to the LGSs, going to do the pre-release, so you know what to see and what you're looking for in the set. So, start off, probably the newest and most unique mechanic is the prepare mechanic. You'll see it on the card. In the text box of the card, there will be a smaller text box with a spell. Could be a instant or a sorcery. You'll see it up on creature types. I haven't seen artifacts or enchantments, but in Wizard's article, they do say that it could potentially show up on any permanent. So maybe in the future we'll see prepared on instants or artifacts, maybe even a planeswalker or two. The thing to note about prepared is it doesn't count as a sorcery when you're tutoring, right? If you're trying to look for a creature that has a prepared spell that you're looking for, you can't. You have to tutor for the creature, not for the spell itself. And timing restrictions still apply to the prepared spell. So if it says that it's a prepared sorcery, you can only cast it at sorcery speed. If it's a prepared instant, you can cast it at instant speed. So the example shown in the spoiler is Studious First Year, 1 green mana for a 1/1 bear wizard. This creature enters prepared, so it already enters. There are no stipulations to perform to get the spell prepared. And so then its prepared spell is Rampant Growth. So, right, you cast your Studious First Year, turn 1, enters prepared, turn 2, you could pay 2 and ramp and tutor for a land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Various prepared cards have triggers to re-prepare the card or to prepare the card. For instance, this Studious First Year can no longer be prepared unless you flicker it. If you flicker it, it enters as a new copy and it enters prepared. So, green does have some ways to flicker creatures, especially for running a Selesnya deck, or even a Simic deck. You have ways to flicker creatures. You could flicker this and then at sorcery speed, pay the 2 mana to tutor for another land. The prepared spell isn't a card. It is a spell, copy of the spell in exile. So if you have that card and it's prepared, and say your Studious First Year gets destroyed before your next upkeep where you can cast the Rampant Growth, you lose that spell. That spell fizzles. There are cards in the set that allow you to unprepare a creature. So if your opponent targets your prepared creature with a way to unprepare it, you lose that spell in exile until you can prepare the spell again. So just be mindful of that. And just like casting a copy of the prepared spell works like casting any other spell, so it still counts as technically casting the spell. So anything that says whenever you cast will still trigger those abilities will still trigger off the prepared spell. Moving on, we have the college-specific mechanics. We'll start with Silverquill with the repartee mechanic. Repartee is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature, do something. So the best thing I can equate this to is the old heroic mechanic from Theros. Whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, do something. But this happens whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets any creature. So you can target your own creatures, you can target your opponent's creatures, and get a benefit. So the example card in the article is Conciliator's Duelist, 2 white, 2 black. Whenever this creature enters, draw a card. Each player loses 1 life. It's a 4/3 core warlock with repartee. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature, exile up to 1 target creature, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Right, you could target an opponent's creature to destroy it, and then exile up to 1 target creature. So you could exile one of your creatures, you could flicker one of your creatures. If you're targeting your own stuff with instants and sorceries to kind of like buff up your board, you could target a creature to buff it up, blink one of your value engine pieces, and go that way. I think it's going to be actually a really cool mechanic and build some really tricky blink synergies into decks, or just targeting your own stuff. Seems like a pretty good mechanic. Moving on to the Prismari mechanic called Opus. This is a reinvented version of the Magecraft mechanic from the original Strixhaven set. Magecraft had whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, do something. Opus is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, do something, but if that instant or sorcery cost you 5 or more mana, do something better. So for instance, Color Storm Stallion is a 1 colorless, 1 red, 1 white, 1 red, 1 blue elemental horse. It's a 3/3 with ward and haste. Opus, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. If 5 or more mana was spent to cast this spell, create a token that's a copy of this creature. So if you are playing this in a cantrip build, like a Veyran Voice of Duality from the original, that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, do something and then do it again, because it doubles the triggers, right? This would get 2+1/+1 counters on it until end of turn. If you cast a 5 mana spell, it would get a +1/+1 counter, and then you would also create a copy of it. If you were running it in Veyran and you cast a 5 mana value, it would get +2/+2, and you would make 2 copies of it. So it's just, like I said, it's just an improved version of Magecraft. Allows you to get benefit for casting higher mana value spells. Like Wizard said, standards right now is pretty quick. They're looking to hopefully eventually slow it down a bit, and I could see Opus being a way. All right, we're trying to turn people away from just cantripping and going into casting higher mana value spells and getting a benefit in wanting to cast higher mana value spells in Spellslinger decks. Moving forward, there's the Infusion mechanic from Witherbloom. Infusion has the stipulation, creatures with infusion, spells with infusion, give you a benefit if you've gained life that turn. So the sample card for the mechanic is Old Growth Educator, 2 colorless, a black and a green, for a 4/4 Treefolk Druid with Vigilance Reach. When this creature enters, you put 2+1/+1 counters on it if you gain life this turn. It doesn't stipulate currently on this mechanic how much life you gain, but it just says as long as you've gained life. So, and according to the article, Infusion doesn't care about how much life you've gained over the course of the turn, as long as you've gained life during the turn. And it doesn't matter if you've gained life and then lost life. the gained life trigger still occurred. So even if you gained life and then, toxic deluged and lost life, you still technically gain life that turn, so you would get the benefit of infusion. Moving on to Lorehold. Lorehold actually got a returning mechanic in flashback. So you'll see flashback on Lorehold cards. Lorehold's like an archaeological college. So I actually kind of like that they went back to flashback. The example card is Molten Note X and a red and a white. For a sorcery, it deals damage equal to the amount of mana spent to cast the spell, and then you untap all creatures you control. Flashback, 6 colorless, red and a white, allows you to cast this card from your graveyard for its flashback cost and then exile it. Lorehold, looking at the set mechanics, Lorehold's really cares about things leaving your graveyard, gives you a benefit for things leaving your graveyard. So when you flashback a spell, it's cast from your graveyard, then it's exiled, that counts as leaving your graveyard. So I can see a lot of synergy with the spells that, create tokens when things leave the graveyard, deal damage when things leave the graveyard. So flashback is going to be a really good card, and there are cards that reduce flashback costs, so gives you a benefit there. Moving on to Quandrix, the last college. It has the new ability called Increment. Increment, whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana you spent to cast that, if you spent is greater than this creature's power or toughness, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, right? This is the evolve mechanic, more tuned to basically any spell. Right, evolve was if you cast a creature, it came back and returned to Ravnica. If you cast a creature, if that creature had greater power or greater toughness than the creature with evolve, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. This is mana value evolve for any spell. So, I have the sample card here is Cuboid Colony, 1 green and a blue for a 1/1 flash flying trample insect with increment. So this comes down as a 1/1. You cast a 2 mana spell, it gets +1/+1. You cast a 3 mana spell, it gets +1/+1, and so on and so forth. You get this down early, and then as you start building your board, this creature will get bigger. Kind of a cool mechanic. And you got to check for triggers. Got to remember it's either power or toughness. So if you have a varying power and toughness creature, and say it's a 1/2, you cast a 2 mana spell, it will trigger off the power trigger, so it would get +1/+1. Or if you cast a 3 mana spell, it would trigger off the 1 or the 2. But just ways to check that. Moving on to another set mechanic, not restricted to any of the colleges, and it's Paradigm. Paradigm is a reinterpretation of the old Epic mechanic. The Epic mechanic were on some powerful spells back around Kamigawa block. You cast an epic spell, you can't cast another spell the rest of the game, but that epic spell gets cast on each of your turns. But Paradigm kind of is an improvement on Epic. Paradigm basically says, whenever you cast this spell, if it resolves, exile it, and then you may cast a copy from exile without paying a mana cost at the beginning of each one of your first main phases. So you would go untap, upkeep, draw, first main phase, that spell would cast. The card example here is Improvisation Catastrophe, improvisation capstone, 5 colorless, and then 2 red. Exile cards from the top of your library. Until you exile cards with total mana value 4 or greater, you may cast any number of spells from among them without paying their mana cost. So if this resolves, then you get to do that every one of your first main phases. And it says you'll have the opportunity to cast it on each of your turns no matter what happens to the previous one. So if one of the copies is countered, right, if the first spell's countered, if the initial casting countered, it doesn't do anything. If you successfully cast it the first time and then at the beginning of your next main phase you go to cast it and somebody counters it, your next turn it would still go to cast the spell because it's only countering the copy. So that's the thing. If you can resolve the original, it doesn't matter what happens with the subsequent copies. If somebody counters them, okay, but then the next turn rotation, you get to cast it again. I'm going to be a little bit curious how like copying the spell works. I would figure, because it says it does specifically say if this is the first time this spell has resolved, so I don't think any of the copies would move to your exile to cast every turn. Still think you're probably limited to one copy of it a turn. So it's a little bit tricky that way if you like twin cast it and then counter the original. I still think because one copy of it, the copy of it actually resolved, that would get moved to exile, but you wouldn't get 2 copies of it to cast every turn. You'd still only get the 1 copy to cast every turn. Moving on to the final mechanic, and we saw this in Lorwyn Eclipsed actually, and it's Converge. It's going to be on like the Archaics, the avatars that are on the world on the plane of Strixhaven. Converge, you get it gets a benefit for how much mana was used to, or what colors of mana were used to cast the spell. So the example card is Rancorous Archaic, 5 colorless, for a Trample Reach avatar. It's a 2/2, and then it has Converge. This creature enters with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. So if you use all 5 colors, if you use Wooburg, this enters as a 7/7 Trample Reach for 5. If you use less than that, of course, the power is reduced. And that's the main set mechanics for Secrets of Strixhaven. There is another little teaser in the article that says there's going to be a new artifact subtype for book called Book for the set, and there's even talk about future Oracle text updates for artifacts being classified as books. So I think like Tome of Legends will probably eventually be reclassified, recategorized, with an Oracle text update as a book. The Underworld Cookbook, right, is a book. Cody might even have a book stapled to its creature type. That being said, that's a quick summary of the Strixhaven set mechanics. Please feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, what mechanics you like, any additional in-depth review or description of the mechanics. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.